Derek Holloway's co-workers had been laughing about it for a week. They'd signed him up for a blind date as a prank. The quiet single dad who never went out, who always rushed home to his kid, who wore the same 3 shirts on rotation. "You need to live a little," they'd said, shoving the restaurant address into his hand. What's the worst that could happen? Now Derek stood frozen at the entrance, his second-hand blazer suddenly too tight across his shoulders. The woman waiting at the corner table wasn't some random stranger. She was Caroline Webb, his boss. The same woman who ran department meetings without ever looking his way, who signed off on his overtime requests with a single cold initial. Her eyes lifted from the menu. Recognition hit her face. Confusion first, then something that made Derek's stomach drop. He could turn around now, walk away, pretend his idiot friends hadn't just destroyed his career for a laugh. But Caroline Webb wasn't reaching for her phone to call HR. She was pulling out the chair across from her. And the way she looked at him like she'd been waiting for someone exactly like him terrified Derek more than losing his job ever could. The restaurant hummed with the quiet clink of silverware and murmured conversations, the kind of place Derek would never have chosen for himself. White tablecloths, candles flickering, and small glass holders. A menu without prices, which meant everything cost more than he made in a day. He walked toward Caroline's table like a man approaching his own execution, each step heavier than the last. She watched him come, her expression unreadable, and Derek found himself cataloging every detail of this moment. The way the candlelight caught the auburn in her hair, the simple black dress that looked nothing like the sharp blazer she wore to the office, the absence of the tablet she usually carried like a shield. He reached the table and stood there, hands hanging uselessly at his sides, waiting for her to laugh or dismiss him, or do whatever bosses did when their employees stumbled into their personal lives uninvited. Caroline gestured to the empty chair. "You might as well sit down," she said. Standing there, looking terrified, isn't going to make this any less awkward. Her voice carried none of the clip efficiency he was used to hearing in conference rooms. It was softer, almost amused, and that threw him more than anything else. Derek lowered himself into the chair, hyper-aware of how the leather creaked under his weight, how his blazer pulled across his back, how completely out of place he was in this world of candlelight and cloth napkins. Across the table, Caroline folded her hands and studied him with the same focused attention she gave quarterly reports. So she said, "Your friends have an interesting sense of humor." Derek's throat tightened, but he forced himself to meet her eyes. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I had no idea they were setting me up with— if I had known it was you, I never would have." He stopped, realizing he was making everything worse. Caroline tilted her head, and something shifted in her expression. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of a smile she was trying to suppress. "Never would have what?" she asked. "Shown up. Worn that blazer." "Both." Derek felt heat climb up his neck. The blazer was a thrift store find, the nicest thing he owned, and he'd been proud of it until approximately 30 seconds ago. "I should go," he said, starting to rise. "This was a mistake. I don't want to make things weird at work. And I'm sure you have better things to do than sit down, Derek." Her voice was quiet but firm, the same tone she used when projects were going off the rails, and she needed everyone to stop panicking and focus. Derek sat. He didn't know what else to do. Caroline picked up her menu and opened it, scanning the options with practiced ease. "I don't know about you," she said, "but I skipped lunch for a meeting that ran 3 hours long, and I'm starving. The salmon here is excellent. If you're wondering." She looked up at him over the top of the menu. "We're already here. We might as well eat." The waiter appeared, and Caroline ordered for both of them. Salmon for her, the steak for him, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. Derek watched her navigate the interaction with effortless grace, and he wondered what it must be like to move through the world with that kind of confidence, to never second-guess every word that came out of your mouth. When the waiter left, silence settled over the table like a fog. Derek stared at his water glass, at the condensation beating on the crystal, at anything that wasn't Caroline Webb's face. "You're very quiet," she observed. "At work, I've noticed." Derek's head snapped up. She'd noticed him. He was a mid-level analyst in a department of 40 people. invisible in the best of circumstances. And she'd noticed him. "I didn't think you knew who I was," he admitted, beyond a name on overtime requests. Caroline's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know everyone who works for me," she said. "I know you're the one who stays late to fix other people's mistakes. I know you've turned down 2 promotions because they would have required travel. And I know you leave at exactly 5:15 every day, no matter what." She paused. "I assumed it was a second job or a sick relative. Something that explained why someone with your skills was content to stay exactly where he was." Derek's chest tightened. He thought of Theo, probably eating dinner right now at Mrs. Patterson's house next door, waiting for his dad to come home and read him a story before bed. He thought of all the late nights and early mornings, the juggling act that never got easier, the constant fear that he was failing at everything that mattered. "It's my son," he said. The words came out before he could stop them. "I have a 7-year-old. His name is Theo. His mother left when he was 2, and it's just been the 2 of us ever since." He braced himself for the reaction he always got. The slight widening of the eyes, the careful step backward, the sudden discovery of somewhere else to be. Single dads were baggage. Single dads were complicated. Single dads were someone else's problem. But Caroline didn't step backward. She didn't look away. She leaned forward, her chin resting on her folded hands, and she said, "Tell me about him." The wine arrived, and somewhere between the first glass and the second, Derek found himself talking. Really talking in a way he hadn't done with anyone in years. He told her about Theo's obsession with dinosaurs, about the Model T-Rex they were building together out of cardboard and hope. He told her about the school play coming up, how Theo had landed the role of tree number 3 and was treating it like an Oscar-winning performance. He told her about the nights when Theo couldn't sleep, when they'd lie on the backyard grass and count stars until the boy's eyes finally closed. He told her about the guilt that lived in his chest like a second heartbeat, the fear that he wasn't enough, that deserved better, that someday his son would look back and see all the ways his father had fallen short. Caroline listened. That was what struck Derek most. She didn't interrupt or offer advice or try to fix anything. She just listened, her eyes never leaving his face, her attention complete and unwavering. When he finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. And Derek felt suddenly exposed, like he'd peeled back his skin and shown her all the broken pieces underneath. "You know what I see when I look at you," Caroline said finally. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, nothing like the steel-edged authority she wore in the office. "I see a man who shows up every day, no matter how hard it gets. You show up for your son, for your job, for a blind date that turned out to be your boss." A small smile tugged at her lips. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Derek didn't know what to say. He'd spent so long seeing himself through the lens of what he lacked. The absent wife, the missed promotions, the clothes that never quite fit right, that he'd forgotten there might be another way to look at his life. "Most people I know," Caroline continued, "they're running from something, from responsibility, from commitment, from anything that might actually matter. But you," she shook her head, "you're running toward it. That's not baggage, Derek. That's the opposite of baggage. That's exactly what makes you different from everyone else." The food arrived, but Derek barely tasted it. His mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the Caroline Webb sitting across from him with the one he thought he knew. The distant executive, the untouchable boss, the woman who seemed to exist in a completely different universe from the one where he scraped by paycheck to paycheck. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Caroline nodded, cutting into her salmon with precise, elegant movements. "Why did you come tonight? I mean, you must have known it was a setup. You could have just not shown up." She was quiet for a moment, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. "Do you know what it's like," she said slowly, "to be defined by your job title? To have people see the corner office and the business cards and never look any further?" She set down her fork. "I've been on dozens of dates, dinners with men who wanted to network, to get a foot in the door, to use me as a stepping stone. They didn't want to know me. They wanted to know what I could do for them." She met Derek's eyes, and he saw something there he hadn't expected. Vulnerability, carefully hidden, but unmistakable. When I saw the dating profile my assistant created, don't ask. She has boundary issues. I thought, what's the point? It would just be more of the same. But then I walked in here and saw you. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. The look on your face when you recognized me, pure, unfiltered terror, and I thought, well, at least this one isn't trying to impress me. Derek laughed despite himself, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise both of them. I'm pretty sure terror isn't what you're supposed to feel on a first date, he said. Maybe not, Caroline agreed. But it's honest, and I don't get a lot of honesty in my life. She picked up her wine glass, swirling the liquid thoughtfully. People tell me what they think I want to hear. They agree with me even when I'm wrong. They treat me like I'm made of glass and power, and they're terrified of breaking either one. She took a sip. It gets exhausting being someone's boss all the time. Sometimes I just want to be someone's... She trailed off, searching for the right word. Equal, Derek offered quietly. Caroline's eyes met his, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding the first fragile threat of connection. Yes, she said, exactly that. The restaurant began to empty around them. Couples drifting toward the exit, waiters clearing tables with practiced efficiency. Derek hadn't noticed the time passing, hadn't noticed anything beyond the woman across from him, and the conversation that flowed between them like water, finding its natural path. They talked about everything and nothing. Her childhood in a small town she'd escaped as soon as she could. His dreams of owning his own business someday. The books they loved. The movies they hated. The way life never seemed to follow the plans you made for it. It was easy in a way Derek hadn't expected. Natural in a way he'd forgotten conversations could be. And underneath all of it, he felt something shifting. Something dangerous and thrilling and completely terrifying. He was starting to like Caroline Webb. Not the boss. Not the executive. Not the name on the door. The woman. The real one hiding behind all the armor. When the check came, Caroline reached for it automatically, but Derek's hand got there first. Let me, he said. Please. She raised an eyebrow. You know, I make significantly more money than you do. I know, Derek said. But this is... He struggled to find the words. You said, people are always trying to use you for what you can do for them. I don't want to be that. I want to be. He stopped feeling foolish. What did he want to be? Her employee? Her friend? Something more? The thought made his stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with the wine. Caroline studied him for a long moment, and then she nodded slowly. Okay, she said, but I'm paying next time. The words hung in the air between them. Next time. A promise or a question? Derek couldn't tell which. He paid the bill with money he probably shouldn't have spent. And they walked out into the cool evening air, standing on the sidewalk in the glow of the restaurant's windows. The city hummed around them, distant traffic and laughter from a bar down the street, but it all felt very far away. This was, Caroline started. Unexpected, Derek finished. Yes, she smiled. A real smile, not the professional mask she wore in meetings. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. She hesitated, then reached out and touched his arm, a brief contact that sent electricity through his entire body. Good night, Derek. I'll see you Monday. She turned and walked toward a waiting car, her heels clicking on the pavement, and Derek watched her go, feeling like his entire world had just tilted on its axis. Monday morning arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train, and Derek walked into the office with a knot in his stomach, the size of a fist. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the same as always. The coffee machine gurgled in the break room, the same as always. His co-workers hunched over their keyboards, typing and clicking and ignoring each other, the same as always. But nothing felt the same. Derek sat at his desk and tried to focus on the spreadsheet in front of him, but his eyes kept drifting toward the glass-walled office in the corner where Caroline Webb was already on the phone, her back to the open floor, her posture rigid with professionalism. She hadn't looked at him when he walked in. She hadn't acknowledged him at all. And Derek told himself that was fine. That was expected. That whatever had happened Friday night was a single evening outside the rules of their normal lives, never to be repeated or acknowledged. The morning crawled by in a blur of emails and meetings. and the low-grade anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in Derek's chest. He caught himself glancing at Caroline's office every few minutes, watching for some sign, some signal, some indication that Friday night had meant anything at all. But she remained behind her glass walls, moving through phone calls and documents and the 100 small tasks that consumed her days. She was his boss again. Just his boss. By lunch, Derek had almost convinced himself that he'd imagined the whole thing, the conversation, the connection, the way she'd looked at him like he was something more than a name on a payroll. He was eating a sandwich at his desk, staring blankly at a cost report when his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The coffee in the break room is terrible. There's a cart on the corner of 5th and Main that does a decent espresso. I could use a second opinion. Derek stared at the message, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't have to ask who it was from. The coffee cart was exactly where she'd said it would be. A small operation run by an elderly man with a thick accent and an ancient espresso machine that somehow produced the best coffee Derek had ever tasted. Caroline was already there when he arrived, standing slightly apart from the lunch crowd, wearing the same sharp blazer she'd had on in the office, but somehow looking completely different out here, under the open sky. "You came," she said, when he approached. "I wasn't sure you would." Derek accepted the espresso she handed him. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "We work together. You're my boss. This is complicated," Caroline finished. "I know." She took a sip of her own coffee, her eyes scanning the street with the same analytical focus she brought to everything. "I've been thinking about it all weekend. The smart thing would be to pretend Friday never happened. Go back to being boss and employee. Keep everything clean and professional and safe." She turned to look at him. "But I'm tired of being smart, Derek. I'm tired of doing the right thing all the time and ending up alone anyway." Derek felt the words hit him somewhere deep in the place where he kept all his own loneliness carefully locked away. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know the rules for dating your boss. I don't even know if that's what this is." Caroline laughed a low sound that seemed to surprise her. "I don't know either," she said. "I've never done anything like this before. I've spent my whole career building walls between my personal life and my professional one. And now here I am standing on a street corner with an employee, drinking coffee, and feeling like a teenager with her first crush." She shook her head. "It's ridiculous. We're both too old for this." "Maybe," Derek said. "But maybe that's exactly why it matters." He looked at her. Really looked at her. Seeing past the title in the corner office and the authority that usually made people keep their distance. He saw the woman from Friday night, the one who'd listened to him talk about his son, the one who'd admitted to being lonely, the one who touched his arm and made his whole body light up. "I'm not going to lie," he continued. "I'm terrified of what people will say, of what it might do to my job, of what happens when you realize I'm just a guy with a 7-year-old and a thrift store wardrobe and nothing to offer except accept yourself." Caroline interrupted. "Accept exactly who you are." She reached out and took his hand right there on the street corner where anyone could see. "That's enough, Derek. That's more than enough." The weeks that followed were a careful dance of boundaries and stolen moments. They didn't touch at the office, didn't exchange meaningful glances across the conference room, didn't give anyone any reason to suspect that something had shifted between them. But outside those walls, in the spaces where they could be just Derek and Caroline instead of employee and boss, they found their way toward each other with a kind of desperate, hopeful gravity. They met for coffee at the cart on 5th and Main, their conversations stretching longer each time. They had dinner at quiet restaurants where no one from work would see them, learning each other's stories piece by piece. Caroline told him about her father, who'd never believed she'd amount to anything, and the fire that had driven her to prove him wrong. Derek told her about Theo's mother, about the note she'd left on the kitchen table and the years of silence that followed. They were both broken in their own ways, both scarred by the people who should have loved them best. And somehow that made it easier to be honest with each other. But the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how carefully you try to contain it. Glances lingered a second too long. Names came up in conversation with a frequency that raised eyebrows, and the office, which had always been a place of gossip and speculation, began to whisper. Derek heard the rumors and fragments, muttered comments in the break room, knowing looks exchanged across cubicle walls. Questions that weren't quite questions. He tried to ignore them, tried to focus on his work and his son, and the woman who had somehow become the center of his gravity, but he could feel the walls closing in, could sense the moment approaching when everything would have to be addressed. Caroline mentioned Theo one evening over dinner, her voice carefully casual. "I'd like to meet him," she said. "If you're ready? If you think he's ready?" Derek felt his heart seize with equal parts hope and terror. Theo was everything to him. His reason for getting up in the morning, his compass, his whole world. The thought of introducing him to Caroline, of letting her into that sacred space, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to jump. "What if it doesn't work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if he doesn't like you, or you don't like him, or this whole thing falls apart, and he's left wondering what happened to the nice lady who used to come around?" Caroline reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I can't promise it will work," she said. "I can't promise anything about the future because I've learned the hard way that the future doesn't take requests. But I can promise that I'll be careful with him, that I won't pretend to be something I'm not, or make promises I can't keep. And if it doesn't work," she squeezed his hand, "I'll be careful with the ending too." The meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon at the park near Derek's apartment. Neutral ground chosen with the precision of a diplomatic summit. Theo was suspicious at first, the way 7-year-olds are suspicious of anything that disrupts their routine. He stood half-hidden behind Derek's leg, studying Caroline with narrowed eyes, cataloging this stranger who had somehow earned a place in his father's weekend. But Caroline didn't push. She didn't crouch down and speak in that artificially bright voice adults often used with children, didn't try to win him over with gifts or promises. She just sat on the park bench next to Derek and talked to him like he was a person instead of an obstacle to be overcome. She asked about his dinosaurs. She listened, really listened, when he explained the differences between a T-Rex and an Allosaurus. She didn't pretend to know things she didn't know, and she didn't dismiss his interests as childish or unimportant. And slowly, gradually, Theo began to emerge from behind Derek's leg. By the time the afternoon light began to fade, Theo was showing Caroline his favorite spot by the pond, the one where the turtles sometimes came up to sun themselves on the rocks. Derek watched them from a distance, his son's animated gestures, Caroline's attentive nods, and felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been sealed shut for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Terrifying. Dangerous. Beautiful hope. Later, after Caroline had gone home and Theo was tucked into bed, the boy looked up at his father with those serious eyes that saw more than any child should. "She's nice," Theo said. "Is she going to be around more?" Derek smoothed the hair back from his son's forehead, feeling the weight of the question and everything it implied. "I don't know, buddy," he said honestly. "I hope so. Would that be okay with you?" Theo considered this for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think that would be okay." And he turned over and closed his eyes, leaving Derek alone with the enormity of what was happening to his carefully constructed life. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning with the swift brutality of a summer thunderstorm. Derek arrived at work to find a cluster of co-workers gathered by the coffee machine, their voices dropping to whispers when he approached. He knew, even before he saw the email waiting in his inbox, even before his manager's assistant appeared at his desk with a summon to a meeting, the rumors had reached the wrong ears. Someone had talked. By noon, Derek was sitting in a conference room across from HR, answering questions about the nature of his relationship with Caroline Webb. He told the truth. There was no point in lying. Not anymore, and watched their faces carefully, searching for some indication of what came next. They were professional, neutral, giving nothing away. When they finally let him go with vague promises of further review, Derek walked back to his desk, feeling like a man awaiting sentencing. That same evening, as Derek sat at his kitchen table, trying to help Theo with homework he couldn't focus on, there was a knock at the door. He opened it, expecting Caroline, hoping for Caroline, needing the comfort of her presence after the worst day of his professional life. But the woman standing on his doorstep wasn't Caroline Webb. It was someone he hadn't seen in 5 years. someone he'd trained himself to stop thinking about. Theo's mother. She looked different, older, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of hard years and harder choices. She stood on his porch, with her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. And when she spoke, her voice cracked on the first word. "Derek," she said, "I know I don't have any right to be here. I know what I did, but I've been sober for 2 years now, and I'm working with a therapist. And She took a shaky breath. "I want to know my son. I want to be part of his life. Please." Derek felt the ground shift beneath his feet for the second time that day. Behind him, he heard Theo's small voice, uncertain and confused. "Daddy, who's that lady?" And Derek had no idea what to say, no idea how to explain that the woman who'd left them both behind had suddenly reappeared, wanting back into a life she'd abandoned without a backward glance. He thought of Caroline, of the fragile thing they were building, of how carefully she'd approached Theo. And he thought of his son, who deserved honesty, even when honesty was hard. "Theo," he said quietly, this is someone Daddy needs to talk to. Why don't you go finish your homework in your room?" The boy looked between them, sensing the tension, the weight of unspoken words, but he nodded and retreated, leaving Derek alone with the ghost of his past. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest Derek had ever had. He didn't yell. He didn't slam the door. He listened as Theo's mother. Her name was Jenna, though he'd stopped using it years ago, explained where she'd been, what she'd done, how she'd finally found her way to recovery. He listened to her apologies, her regrets, her desperate hope for a second chance. And when she was done, he told her the truth, that Theo barely remembered her, that the boy had built a life without her, had learned to stop asking why Mommy left, that bringing her back in now, disrupting the stability Derek had fought so hard to create, wasn't something he could agree to without thinking very, very carefully. Jenna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said. "I'm not asking for overnight visits or custody or anything like that. I just want a chance, even if it's just a letter, even if it takes years. I just want him to know that his mother loves him, even if she didn't know how to show it before." Derek stood in his doorway long after Jenna had left, staring at the empty street, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. His job was in jeopardy. His relationship with Caroline was about to become public knowledge, and now this, the mother who disappeared, resurfacing just when everything else was falling apart. He pulled out his phone and called Caroline. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and worried. "I heard what happened at work," she said. "Are you okay?" Derek laughed. A hollow sound. "No," he admitted. "I'm really not." He told her everything. The HR meeting, Jenna's visit, the fear that was coiling in his chest like a living thing, and Caroline listened the way she always listened, without judgment or interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Come over," she said finally. "Bring Theo. I'll order pizza, and we'll figure this out together." But he wasn't the only one weathering the storm. 2 floors up, Caroline was in her own meeting the next morning, facing the board members who'd built the company and entrusted her with its future. Derek learned later what she'd said to them, how she'd acknowledged the relationship, accepted responsibility, refused to minimize or excuse what had happened. She didn't blame Derek, didn't throw him under the bus to save herself. She stood there in that room full of people who held her career in their hands, and she told them the truth, that she'd fallen in love with a man who worked for her and that she wasn't going to apologize for it. The fallout was swift and surgical. Caroline stepped down from her direct management role, moving to a position that removed her from Derek's chain of command. It was a demotion in all but name, a sacrifice of the authority she'd spent years building. Some people whispered that she'd lost her edge, that she'd let her personal life compromise her professional judgment. Others, fewer but not none, recognized it for what it was. A woman choosing integrity over convenience, choosing love over power. And then, in the wreckage of everything they'd tried to keep separate, something unexpected happened. The company's biggest client, the one whose account Derek had been quietly maintaining for months, fixing problems, and solving crises that no one else even noticed, asked for a meeting. They wanted to expand the partnership. They said they'd been impressed by the attention to detail, the consistent quality, the sense that someone actually cared about getting things right. They wanted to know who was responsible. They wanted to offer him a promotion. Derek sat in the CEO's office listening to words that didn't quite make sense. A new role, more responsibility, a chance to build something instead of just maintaining it. They weren't offering it because of Caroline, they said. They were offering it because he'd earned it, because his work had spoken for itself, because sometimes talent finds its way to the surface, no matter how hard you try to hide it. He thought of all the years he'd spent keeping his head down, staying invisible, believing that the best he could hope for was to survive. He thought of Caroline, who'd seen something in him that he couldn't see in himself. He thought of Theo, who deserved a father who reached for things instead of just holding on. And he thought of Jenna, surprisingly, of her trembling voice and her desperate hope. And he realized that everyone was capable of change, of growth, of becoming more than the worst thing they'd ever done. "Yes," Derek said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I'll take it." The weeks that followed were a process of rebuilding, piece by careful piece. Derek started his new role, discovering skills he didn't know he had, confidence he'd buried under years of playing small. Caroline found her footing in her new position, discovering that giving up direct authority had freed her in ways she hadn't expected. And Theo began the slow, careful process of getting to know his mother again. It started with letters, then phone calls, then supervised visits at the park. Derek watched his son navigate the complicated terrain of divided loyalties, of loving his father and being curious about his mother, of building new relationships while protecting the ones he already had. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, tears, long nights when Derek wondered if he was doing the right thing, but there was also grace. The grace of watching his son expand his capacity for love, the grace of Caroline's steady presence through all of it, the grace of a second chance he hadn't known he needed. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning that felt like every other Sunday morning and also like nothing that had come before, Derek stood in his small kitchen making pancakes, while Theo set the table with exaggerated care. Caroline was due to arrive for brunch, a ritual they'd established somewhere along the way, a fixed point in the week that had come to mean home. Derek flipped a pancake and listened to his son chattering about school, about the science project he was working on, about the friend who'd said something funny at lunch, about the letter he was writing to his mom. Normal things, everyday things, the kind of things Derek had once thought would be his whole life, and now understood were just the foundation for something larger. The doorbell rang, and Theo raced to answer it, his socks sliding on the hardwood floor. Derek heard Caroline's voice warm and familiar, and his son's excited response, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Peace, maybe, or gratitude, or just the simple, extraordinary knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. Caroline appeared in the kitchen doorway, Theo already tugging her toward the table to show her something important. She looked at Derek over the boy's head, and her smile was soft and real and completely without armor. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Derek answered. And it was. It was a good morning. The kind that once seemed impossible. The kind that arrived not because life got easier, but because he'd stopped waiting for permission to reach for more. The single dad who'd been afraid to hope. The boss who'd been afraid to be seen. The little boy who'd been afraid of losing what little he had. They'd found each other in the wreckage of a joke that wasn't funny. And they'd built something real from the pieces. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. The pancakes were ready. The table was set. And somewhere in the distance, Derek could hear his co-workers laughing at a prank they'd pulled months ago, never knowing that their joke had opened a door he'd been too scared to approach on his own. He'd have to thank them someday, he thought. Or maybe he already had, just by becoming the person who could stand in this kitchen on this morning, and finally truly know, that the worst thing that could happen had turned into the best thing that ever